Hi everybody, as promised, I am going to do a little interview with Peter and talk about Japan. And I thought, what a better way to start than using these beautiful little...
Those cups were my parents. They passed us along to us.
Cups were from Japan, from Peter's parents' time there. And I don't have a Japanese teapot, but there's a little tea for you.
Arigatou gozaimasu.
And a little tea for me. And so welcome. Yeah, we're here, and I'm just going to ask Peter some questions just to document a little bit of the history, your memories, things that are meaningful to you. So
this is called ocha.
Ocha.
Japanese tea.
And how do you say thank you for the tea?
Arigatou gozaimasu.
Arigatou gozaimasu. All right. So here's a little thank you before we get started. So Peter, how did your family first get interested in Japan?
Well, my parents became Quakers early in the war. So when a decision was made to send all the Japanese Americans on the West Coast into relocation camps far away from their homes, my parents were horrified. And they decided that one way they could respond to this was to go as recreation directors to a camp in Arkansas. And they spent, I think, just a summer there, basically teaching square dancing to Japanese Americans. I don't know if they liked it, but they went there. And then after that, they really cultivated relationships with Japanese people in the town where we lived, Ann Arbor, Michigan. And my uncle had lived in Japan as a serviceman during the war, Korean War, and had a Japanese exchange student for a number of years. So we used to go visit this Japanese family for young woman for a couple summers in New Hampshire.
And how old were you when you would, those first memories? How old were you?
I remember one thing as a child that was, again, an impact of my parents' experience at the camp. A lot of children in the 50s used to say bombs over Tokyo to kind of not mean anything about Japan. It was just kind of like an expression when you were throwing rocks in the air or clods of dirt or something. And my parents always very severely told me, no, you must not do that. You must not say that. You have to remember what that means. People would be dying if you were dropping bombs on Tokyo.
So how old would you have been?
When we went to Japan?
No, when you were told not to do those expressions.
Oh, maybe 7 or 8.
Basically about genocide.
Yeah.
And
so my father got an opportunity then to go to Japan. They wanted to go to Japan for all these years from their experience there. And when he got his first sabbatical as a college teacher, he's asked to go to Japan, and he got a Fulbright scholarship. He was a sociologist to study comparing the effects of having a love match or an arranged marriage and see the impact they would have on families. He discovered a secret clue to the research. It made no difference how you got married. You had the same amount of happiness either way.
So just to have a little bit of context, though, what year was this? This was a while ago.
Well, my parents went, we all went, my 4 brothers, my 3 brothers and I, and my parents spent my fifth grade year in elementary school, which was 1958-59 in Japan.
All right. That's really a long time ago. I mean, I think of myself as, barely living at that point. I think I might have just been born.
almost 65 years ago.
So tell us about your stay in Japan as a child.
Well, the most extraordinary thing was today there's almost no traditional Japanese homes in Tokyo and probably in most of the big cities. But for one thing, so much of the city was destroyed by bombing raids. But there were sections of Japan and Tokyo at the time that had Japanese houses. This house had the traditional shoji walls. They're kind of made out of paper. And one particular shoji screen, the children were allowed to poke their fingers through so we wouldn't wreck all of them. We could only use that one place we could wet our fingers and put them through.
Was that just your parents coming up with a way to deal with four busy boys?
We found other Japanese families who had the same condition. But the floors were made of tatami, made out of reeds, and we slept on the floor in kind of sort of like sleeping bags, traditional Japanese bedding. It took a little while getting used to. And in the living room, there was a thing called a Tokonoma, which is a kind of an alcove, which my mother learned flower arranging, and she would make flower arrangements in this little alcove, and they would be in front of a traditional Japanese landscape on a scroll. And some other things about the house which were unusual, well, not unusual for them. We had an ofuro, which meant honorable Japanese bath, a wooden tub that was heated actually with wood fire, this tub. I was not sure my memory was right, but my brother confirmed that. My brothers also remembered the wood fire.
They were able to heat a wooden tub.
Yep,
with fire.
It was an iron firebox that was
okay.
underneath the tub, and you would not wash, you would not use soap in the tub. You would clean yourself kind of like a sponge bath and then get in the tub and soak. It was extremely hot. And we would do that many, many evenings, each of us taking turns going into the tub. And we also had a small Japanese garden with a little kind of a bridge and a little old stone Japanese lantern and beautiful plantings in the backyard of our house.
Sounds beautiful. So out of those memories, do you remember any smells? Or mostly just images?
Well, lots of images. We had to ride for about an hour to go to a Japanese American school each day on a what was called a trolley bus, which took you through the winding streets across the city. And we had got to see lots of things out the window on this long bus ride. And we did have some really extraordinary kind of journeys while we were there. We went one week to a traditional Japanese inn in the mountains, and it was deep snow all around us, snowdrifts, and kind of beautiful evergreen trees covered in snow. And the rooms were unheated, so it was very, very chilly in the rooms in the middle of winter. And so the only warm place in the room where the children slept during this trip, they have a kind of a tradition of having a table, a low table where you sit on the tatami, and there's a kind of a rug around the table to keep your legs at least warm. And we kind of crawled under that rug to get the charcoal heat during the night. The other thing that was very thrilling was that there was it was a hot spring, and that people bathed in the nude in the hot spring. That wasn't always true, but in this traditional inn, they only had one hot spring, and there were some old Japanese women in this tub who were nude, and that was kind of a little strange and exciting at the
For
same
a 12-year-old
time. For a 12-year-old or younger.
So
we also took one other wonderful trip,
yeah.
I remember well, to Kyoto and Nara, two of the oldest cities in Japan. Nara has buildings. I remember my memory, and I found out I was correct, was that it's actually the picture on the website you made about the trip of the oldest Japanese buildings in the world, going back to the 800s, actually, these wooden buildings. And there was a pagoda and a temple, which were very, very old Japanese buildings, but lots of deer that were kind of out of control and would sort of nip you if you didn't give them food.
Oh my gosh.
Around these old Japanese buildings in Nara, the ancient medieval capital of Japan.
Wow. Almost like the deer were sort of protecting the ancient...
Yeah, I guess.
Maybe. I don't know. You wanted me to ask you how it affected your family after you returned.
Well, my family had, like I said, already been a little affected by its love of Japan before we went, but there were lots of different little things that affected our life. There were certain words that we would always use. We didn't really learn to speak Japanese fluently, but there's a very interesting word, yoisho, and I think it's kind of translated as up and down. But if my father would lift one of the children up into a bunk, he would say yoisho as he lifted them up or bring them down. Or if we were kind of lifting furniture or something up and down, he would say yoisho, or we would say yoisho. And other words we used were abunai for danger, and let's see, what were some of the other words we used?
Didn't he greet you as a greeting?
Oh, there's a word that you use when you come home from being out, like the parent that is working outside. You say tadaima, and the people answer in the home, the family, okai rinasai. I might have gotten those mixed up. Anyway, you say one and the other responds. And you also say itadakimasu when you start your meals. So we did these words in our family, itadakimasu every night before we'd start supper. Abunai if you had to worry about something being too hot or dangerous or something like that. And there was a few other words that were part of our culture. And my mom continued to do flower arrangements throughout my childhood that she'd make in our home, which were very beautiful. And we had kind of traditional Japanese robes called yukata, and we had cushions that you use on the floor called zabuton. And so there were these different either objects or traditions or words or languages that we used throughout my childhood.
What about cooking? I mean, I remember growing up in the 60s and, back then, I don't really remember, in my personal, childhood memories thinking about eating seaweed or anything that would have been traditionally Japanese.
Well, we did have a cook that cooked quite a few traditional foods in our house as we were growing up. Certainly we had lots of American
in Japan.
Yeah.
But when you came home, though?
Well, I was going to say, there were some foods which I didn't like that were Japanese. I didn't like soba, which I think are buckwheat noodles.
Mm-hmm.
But I loved sushi. We started eating sushi when we were children there. I loved tempura. And so both in my family when we would go out to eat occasionally, although we didn't eat out much as a child, and particularly when I had my own children, we used to take our kids to Japanese restaurants and eat sushi or tempura and things like that. And those were always very attractive to me. And I would say that in general, Japan, the experience there left a big impact on my things that I liked. It affected my sense of what's beautiful for architecture, for gardens. I, in college, read some books by a Japanese Zen Buddhist who was writing about Zen Buddhism. I started watching Miyazaki, traditional Japanese, very famous Japanese filmmaker, while I was in college. And of course, later our family used to enjoy watching Miyazaki movies together. So I guess just the way of kind of carrying yourself, of politeness, of greeting people, of being gracious, all these things kind of had an impact on me.
Of course, now I have Japanese members of my family,
That's
Japanese American members of my family, and I know my mother went to Japan and really wanted to honor the culture and learn more about it and learn the language. And so I guess I'm just curious, how I know you haven't been back. I mean, that's the whole point of us trying to organize this trip. Is there something that you really long to do once you get to go back? I mean, obviously we're not going to go during the when the pandemic is so awful, but the idea is to save this for a time that's safe.
Well, all of my family, except for me, my brothers and my parents went back to Japan. In fact, two of my brothers and my parents lived there for 2 full years while I was in college. And so they had many, many different kinds of experiences because my brothers were older. And in addition, both my parents and my brothers all went to Japan on individual trips later, often during one of my cousins, my wonderful cousin Megan, lived in Japan with her future husband for a couple of years.
You mean your niece?
My niece, not my cousin yet. My niece.
Your brother's daughter.
My niece Megan lived in Japan for a year or two.
Rewind.
Teaching English, and all my brothers went to visit Megan and when she was there, and I always had this kind of indirect longing, but then my older son Eli, when he got married, went for 2.5 weeks to Japan on his honeymoon. And the pictures that he brought back and the stories of the traditional inn they stayed in, a UNESCO village with thatched roofed homes, going to Kyoto and walking a cherry strewn path along a canal. All those stories kind of reawakened the longing. I'd always assumed I would go back to Japan, but somehow the money or the family obligations or jobs or music touring, it just never seemed to quite work out to go back.
Yeah.
And so I never even thought, I just thought I'd missed the chance. But my older son, Eli, called me up when he knew I was going to be 75 and said, "Is there anything special you'd like?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know, just anything will be fine." And kind of blew him off. But he said, "Well, Karen and I have an idea, kind of an idea. What would you think about seeing if we could raise enough money for you to kind of experience some of the things we experienced at our honeymoon?" And that landed so beautifully to think about planning a trip if it could be possible. And then you and Eli sort of launched this this campaign.
Well, I will say we're so grateful for everyone who's contributed, and a lot
Very
of people,
generous.
A lot of people have been asking, "Annie, are you going to go?" And yes, I will go with Peter. I'll make sure he remembers who his nieces and nephews are, and not as confuse him with his cousins. And teasing you.
Make sure I don't get lost.
Yeah, but I'm hoping we have some wonderful friends here in Western Mass who go to Japan on a regular basis, and of course we've got our family as resources, and so we're hoping to connect and see some beautiful things.
We promised to take lots of pictures and come back with lots of stories.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say if we could leave everybody with one thing that, just something that you feel is in your heart that you have carried this whole life with you from your childhood memories, what's the thing that rises to the top?
For me?
Yeah.
I would say this. My father was kind of a workaholic and always thinking about stuff like that. And I think his experience with being in Japan and longing for a different kind of a culture kind of kindled in him a different feeling than his usual way of relating, which was kind of very Western and kind of pushy and stuff like that. Because, that isn't a Japanese thing to do. You are more thoughtful, you are more slow, you are more careful. And I guess I kind of just long for more of that kind of peace and gentleness in my own life. And obviously you can find that in many places, but for me anyway, the experience of being there awakened that longing.
Nice. It's a good longing to have. Well, thank you, everybody. We'll say goodbye for now. Hope
Bye-bye.
to see you again, and thanks again.
Appreciate you.